joining us this morning. We have the PTA has a very special opportunity, we think, which is to engage in a conversation with all of our candidates for Board of Ed. For those of you who don't know me, who haven't heard me yammer on at endless meetings, I'm Deb Jones. I'm the co-president of the JRMS PTA. We extended invitation to our RES friends as well, and the meeting will also be live streamed on the JRMS PTA website to share with others later. So, so enough of me talking. Let's give an opportunity for the candidates to talk. Our format this morning will be 5 minutes for each, where they can share their thoughts, platform ideas, and then the rest of the time will really be dedicated to all of you. So think of questions, things that you're interested in hearing about. Okay? We'll go ahead and get started. We'll call on Laura first. Yes, exactly.
Good morning. I'm Laura Hoeing. I am a resident. I've been a resident of Reading for 12 years, and I grew up next door in Wilton, Connecticut. I have 5 children in the Reading school system, 2 at Barlow, junior and freshman. I have 2 here at JRMS, a 7th grade son and a 5th grade daughter. And then I have a caboose in 2nd grade at RES. And so I still go to the Halloween parade and text my friends like I'm still here, and all of you have kids who are old. So just a little bit about my background. Like I said, I grew up in Wilton, attended school there from 1st through 12th grade, left and studied for a bachelor's and master's degree at Providence College in Providence, Rhode Island. Also met my husband of, as of yesterday, 20 years there in Providence. We started our professional careers there. I worked as a teacher in sort of a startup school, if there's such a thing. And I didn't have a teaching background. I have an undergraduate degree in English and a master's degree in theology. So I jumped in and helped to develop curriculum at the high school level, which was baptism by fire for grades 9 through 12. And then I worked in college admission for a couple of years, which was fascinating. And now that I have a student starting to look at colleges, it's really all coming full circle. And then we moved back to the tri-state area in 2000. Lived in New York, and then back to Connecticut in 2005. So we came to Reading very much for the same reason as most young families, because it's a great place to live and the schools are strong. And I knew that very firsthand because having grown up in Wilton, I knew kind of what the deal was here. So that's kind of it about me. I've been involved in the town since I arrived, joined Neighbors and Newcomers because I didn't have kids in the school yet, so I wanted to meet people. Joined the RTC and have been an involved member of that for 12 years. I've had the privilege to serve on the Planning Commission for the last 2 years, and I've also worked as a deputy registrar for 3 years. So I've gotten involved in several areas of our town, gotten to know a lot of people in our local government and a lot of volunteers, and it just affirms that I love being here, and I want to be a part of maintaining a great atmosphere for all of us. So for the last 4 years, my family did live in the UK from 2009 to 2013 during the academic year, and we spent our summers here in Reading. And when our family moved back, we were there for my husband's job. And so my kids attended an international school for 4 years with an American curriculum. And when we returned in 2013, my perspective, my paradigm had shifted in a lot of ways, having lived in another country. And I started to really tune in even more than I had previously. And one of the things I started following closely, because it was becoming a pinnacle issue, was our state budget. So I'm sort of sad to say that 4 years later, we are finding that we've been on a bit of a decline and in a precarious situation in the state of Connecticut budget-wise. And having grown up here, you know, there wasn't even a state income tax when I grew up here till 1991, which is hard to believe because now our state budget relies on state income tax for 41% of the budget. So that's a huge shift in a pretty short amount of time. And so I think one of the big issues, almost like Groundhog Day for the last 4 cycles that I've paid attention to Board of Ed meetings and to the discussion in town, is how does the state budget affect our local budget? We're seeing now it affects it very dramatically, and how can we protect ourselves? Julia was saying a minute ago, you know, in many ways we're very fortunate in Reading, which is true. The money that we stand to lose if we do not get what we normally get back from the state this time does not destroy us. However, $1.7 million, if we are asked to pay that third of teacher pension costs, will be very hard on us. In this past year, my husband and I moved from one house to another in town. We felt the pain very firsthand of having bought at the peak in 2005, peak of the real estate market, and in 2017 we sold our house for 30% less than what we paid for it, and that doesn't account for the work we put in. If I do that, that 30% goes up. So it's a very real situation.
It's groovy.
And so while in some ways it's not a sexy topic, I think with budgeting and being very well educated on both state and local budget matters is going to be paramount. We want to keep an excellent world-class education as a DERG A town in the town of Reading. If the state is making that harder and harder on us, what are we going to do? And I don't have the answer. If I did, I probably wouldn't be sitting here. But we all care about the education of our kids, whether or not we have kids in the school, and every homeowner cares about property values. So as I just mentioned, you know, between our crash in 2008 and now some of these financial issues, people are leaving Connecticut, and that's not going to help us. How am I on time? Where's my clock? So the second thing that sort of, in my mind, ties to the state budget issue in question is also the declining enrollment conversation that we've been having for the last several years. And it seems, fingers crossed, that we're at a bit of a plateau, which is good news. However, I also think that this current situation is going to require us to remain vigilant for this issue. And if numbers, you know, don't stay sort of at the steady point and continue to decline, obviously all the things we've been talking about are going to have to still be at the top of the conversation. So those are like, we have to deal with these things. But those of us who want to be involved in our kids' education, there's lots of things we want to talk about, but you got to deal with what you have to talk about first. What are some of the other things that I'm interested in? I know that some of our, the Board of Education has been presenting and talking a lot about some of our schools' test scores. On Tuesday night, they spoke specifically and gave a lot of really good data on both RES and JRMS test scores, and showed very specific numbers and where where we want to see all the kids. How do we bring them, the kids who are underperforming, up? It was a very good presentation on how to understand the metrics and the numbers. I'm interested in that. And finally, I think that being forward-thinking in education, whether that is through our commitment to technology, commitment to different styles of learning. We recently switched to Singapore math, for example, so choosing appropriate curricula for our schools. And beyond that, how our styles of education and how our kids are learning, whether it be via technology, are impacting their development compared to how we developed. You know, we learned by putting a pen to paper, and there's neurological data that show that develops certain parts of our brain. If we're no longer doing that and we're typing everything, or on a device a lot of the time, the neurology of your brain looks a little bit different. So there's going to be unintended consequences to these things. I'm super interested in being forward-thinking about supporting our kids as we go forward to that, and I'm way out of time.
Okay, hopefully some expound on it during Q&A.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Chris Parkin. I know a lot of folks in the room. I'm sure a lot of people know me here at this point. A little bit of background for everybody and the folks watching at home. And first, thank you to Deb and the PTA for the opportunity. It's a great opportunity to have a few minutes to talk to folks in a somewhat long-form fashion to sort of explain where we're all coming from. I came to Reading in 2009 with my family. I have 3 children. They're in 6th grade, 3rd grade, and kindergarten. So I'm in it for the long haul at this point. I am a lawyer by trade. I currently work for a public company in Richfield. I manage a litigation program. We have 2,000 employees coast to coast. Before moving in-house, I did a lot of work in the educational sector. I've represented school boards, I've represented teachers, I've represented parents, families. I've seen the issues facing boards from 360 degrees. I'm also heavily involved in the community. I spend more time out of the house on the weekends than in the house, whether it's at baseball games or scouting events. For the past 4 years, I was the committee chairman for PAC 118 here in Reading, which is the single Cub Scout unit we have in town. I was singularly involved and responsible for the administration of up to 100, 120 kids at any given time. So I've learned through that process a lot about what sort of the pulse of the community is, what people are concerned about, particularly folks with school-age children. Hearing their concerns on a regular basis has sort of shaped a lot of where I'm coming from and what my views on all these things are. But sort of the question everybody asks me is, why am I running? Why would I put myself through this? Why am I, fighting with 4 other people for a volunteer job where I'm going to be here late at night once or twice a month? The answer is really simple. I value this town and I value the schools. I moved here, like most of you did, because the schools are very important. I wanted to be in a community where my children could thrive and where I could have them in a school system that would help them develop on an academic and social and personal level. And I think that that's what Reading has always provided, and I want to make sure that that's what Reading continues to provide. They're our #1 asset. And the schools are our #1 driver of what our property values are. And so it's important to maintain their excellence so that we can hope to sell our properties at some point in the future at roughly what we paid for them, if not more. And I think that sound stewardship of our schools is key to the future success of our community. As a lawyer, and as a community member, and as somebody who's been attending meetings in this room for years at this point, I'm able to provide a perspective that can hit the ground running and provide leadership to our board at a time when we're going to have considerable turnover, where come November, the single longest tenured board member, I think, will be 6 years. After that, it'll be 2 years. After that, it might be 7 months. And we have new administration. We have a superintendent only in his 3rd or 4th year. We have a new principal at RES. We have a new special education director coming on board. And so I think it's critically important to have somebody on the board who can hit the ground running, who understands what the issues are. We also have to understand as a Board of Education that we can't control everything. There's a lot of discord in Hartford, but ultimately the Board of Education is going to have very little impact on what happens if Hartford or doesn't. What we can do is be adequately prepared for what may or may not happen with state budgets, so that we know how to position ourselves and our school to protect ourselves from the bumps along the road as they may come. And so there are 3 principles motivating my campaign. First is long-range planning. Second is communication, and third is goal-oriented budgeting. First, with respect to long-range planning, I think that it is critically important that the Board of Education and the community at large move beyond a budget cycle to budget cycle to budget cycle mentality and start asking ourselves, what do we want to be in the future? There was a lot of discussion back in September in the Board of Finance arguments about the Democratic primary there about what we should be looking like and what the school should look like. And lots of numbers were thrown around about, well, in 1996, school class sizes were such and such. I don't care about 1996. I care about what our schools look like in 2026. And I think that the schools need to be looking forward about what the future of education needs to be. The jobs that our kids are going to come out with don't exist right now. And we need to be positioning our schools in a forward-thinking way. And the only way to do that is with strategic long-term planning. To sit down and to say, what do we want the schools to look like and how are we going to get there? What's the curriculum that's going to get there? What's the colleges that's going to get there? And then what are the people that are going to get us there? Because if we continue along the status quo, we're going to end up trailing the districts around us that are thinking prospectively and are thinking toward the future. With respect to communication, I think the biggest problem we have as a community when it comes to the discussion of education is a lack of understanding of what the issues are. If anybody's on Facebook, they know that there is a ton of misinformation about what is or isn't true with respect to the schools, with respect to the budget, with respect to the state standards, with respect to the administrators here or at other buildings. And I think that it's critically important that the board do a better job communicating its goals, its current situation, and really celebrate its successes in the community. Because by having a broader engagement with the community about what we're doing well, we can have better engagement in how we can do it better as a community and leverage all the resources of our community going forward. And part of that is getting rid of really the jargon that I think dominates a lot of Board of Education meetings and a lot of educational conversations. We have administrators giving brilliant presentations for half an hour at a time using terms that the average parent doesn't understand at all. And I think if we turn the conversation towards plain English, we're going to get much better engagement and leverage a lot more of the brilliant resources we have in town. And all right.
Thank you.
Okay.
Honey,
Thanks to the JRMS PTA for having us. My name is Heather Whaley. A little bit about my background. I grew up mostly in Katona, New York, but also overseas in France and in Iran. I went to Holden College, and then I moved to New York, where I became an actor and a writer. I met my husband Frank, who's here, who's also an actor and writer. And I'm an author, a playwright. I write for television, film. That's what I do during the days, and I run. I have two kids, one at John Reed and one at Barlow. I moved to Reading 5 years ago, and I love this community so much. We all do. I've been serving on the Board of Education since February when I was asked to fill a vacancy, and I joined right in the middle of the budget discussions, which was really fun. That was a joke. I know that the Board of Education has been under tremendous pressure from the Board of Finance to make cuts to the budget, both at the elementary school and at the middle school, and that has been happening. And usually the first things to go are the arts teachers. We already lost a music teacher here at John Reed, and unfortunately the school and the students have, I think, paid a price for that. We have a really robust music program at RES, and then it sort of, I think, falls flat here at the middle school. My goal in joining the Board of Education was to be a voice for arts education, something which has been vitally important to my family and to myself. People often talk about arts education as being important to the math education, but arts education is important in and of itself. We might have the next Elon Musk here in Reading, but we might also have the next Lin-Manuel Miranda, and I think we need to be providing for both of them. That said, I know that there are limits to what the government is responsible to provide for our students, and so I've worked to raise money to support arts education both in New York City, where we used to live, and here in Reading, raising funds for the John Reed Theater program. So that's why I joined the Board of Ed, but my time serving since February has been an eye-opener. We are often compared to other schools in our dark, perhaps unfairly, because most of those communities are a lot wealthier, and they can afford to make investments in their schools, which we can't, and we can't sustain because we're so much smaller. But what we can do is learn from the investments that other communities are able to make. I learned this week that New Canaan, sorry, I wrote this down, has invested in 7 content coordinators to help develop curriculum. Now, obviously, we can't do that, nor do we really need that, but perhaps we can hire one. Maybe we can do this along with Easton. I think we should be working with Easton a little bit more closely. To better synchronize our academic programs, particularly in math, to lead our students into the high school curriculum with a much smoother transition. We can also study how these schools organize their days. There are changes we can make to improve school function that don't require additional spending. For example, this past Tuesday, we saw presentations which on school performance that showed that math scores dropped precipitously in the 5th and 6th grade. Now that's not something that's unique to Reading, that happens everywhere. Usually when kids move from one building to another, the scores drop down. But what we're doing here in Reading is we're asking kids to move twice. So we have math scores dropping in 5th grade and then again in 6th grade. In Reading, as most of us know, being middle school parents, your kid moves from RES to John Reed. That's a big transition, and they're kept on team teachers in the 5th grade wing, and then they're integrated into the larger middle school again in 6th grade. So perhaps we could look at restructuring that, maybe integrating them right in 5th grade or keeping them on team teachers till 6th grade so that we don't have 2 consecutive years of a huge transition for them. The change that we definitely do need to make is an increased investment in professional development. That's something that has been routinely one of the first things cut from the budget, and our students pay the direct price for that. Education in America, as we all have read in the news, particularly in math and science, lag behind other nations. And when we're not providing our teachers with the opportunity to be educated themselves on new progressive methods, the kids in Reading are going to lag behind others in our district. If you want to see what advancement in math looks like, go to YouTube and look up how the Chinese multiply. It will literally blow your mind. For the most part, I think we're doing a great job in our schools, but there's definitely room for improvement, and not just academically. I noticed that the dress code at the middle school was vastly different from the dress code at RES and at the high school, and was unfairly worded to target female students. So at the September Board of Ed meeting, I put the dress code on the agenda, and I'm happy to say that on Tuesday night we received a new first draft of a gender-neutral dress code. It's a simple change, but one that will have a really positive impact to the girls at John Reed. What we're doing in our schools right now is preparing kids for jobs that don't exist. I'm almost done. We have no way of knowing what the job market will look like in 2025 or 2030, but we can be sure that whether your kid is a farmer or a CFO, they will be using technology. And I think that it's an investment that we would be very wise to make, is to incorporate computer science into our core curriculum classes, preferably starting in the elementary school. That would not only be providing our kids with opportunity for advancement after here. Imagine if kids were graduating from Barlow knowing how to code and they could just go and get a job. But it would also make Reading a more desirable place for families to choose to educate their kids. My focus on the Board of Education is obviously responsible budgeting, but what's best for the students? And I think that that is the primary goal of the Board of Education. And to that end, the community gives us a certain amount of money to spend, and I think that we should spend it. We have, for many years, underspent our budget, and I think that is doing a disservice to the kids also.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me as well. And I'm so impressed by this group of candidates here. I'm very honored to be sitting up here with them. My name is Colleen Pilato. I have a second grader at RES, and I became involved in the school when my daughter started kindergarten. I became active with the PTA. I'm currently the Vice President of Programs for the PTA at RES, and so my job is to ensure that the funds raised by the PTA are effectively spent on programs that serve the students and teachers. I've been a room parent in kindergarten and first grade, and then in this year I'm the parent editor for the my daughter's second grade class, which is a new role for me, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm the parent that the school calls when they need a parent representative on the Tools for School tour. So I walk around all day with the group, and we go in every single room in the school and check air quality and look for safety concerns in the room. Last year I started a discussion panel with parents and educators in the school to talk about how we might innovate how we teach our students. So I do offer sort of a boots on the ground kind of parent perspective because I am in the school quite a bit. I was educated as a mechanical engineer through college, and then I worked in continuous improvement. I led continuous improvement programs at large corporations until I had my daughter. and I chose to put my career on hold so that I could be very available to her and really cherish the young years. So in my corporate career, I was helping guide corporations as they pursued business excellence. And I believe that my experience there has prepared me to now help our town and to support our town and guide our town as we pursue, academic excellence. We've achieved a lot, and I think there's so much more that we can. There's so much opportunity in the town. I think we can really achieve much more. I'm very interested in primarily the well-being of our children and our students. I'm also very interested in academic innovation. The RES is already doing a lot in the right direction, but there's still more out there that other schools are piloting and can be case studies for us, and we can follow. But we could also, I do hear the conversation where we can't compete with a Darien or perhaps we can't compete with a Darien or a New Canaan because they're a wealthier town. But there's also an opportunity here because we are smaller. I think to create a benchmark curriculum and a benchmark program that we could actually be a model for the other school districts in our dirt to say, hey, we want what Reading has. I look forward to advocating for the students and the parents and our families. I think I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay, thank you.
Well, these guys took all mine. I'm John Riley. I moved to town in 2013 with my family solely for the schools. I have both a third grader and a first grader, girls at RES. My wife is a teacher in Wilton, and so while I try to bring insurance, my profession up at the dinner table, it doesn't seem to do so well. We talk about school all the time, obviously what the girls are doing in school, but also what my wife Lisa does as a humanities coach, and she basically takes what's come down from the state, implements those curriculums. So I hear a lot of fresh ideas there as well, which I hope to be able to bring into our schools as well. Heather made a joke, and I thought it was funny, but unfortunately, it isn't funny. This is what a lot of what's going on right now, and the board focus is on the budgets. It's a big problem for us, both because we were looking at what may happen in the state, and as Chris mentioned, we can't always control, or we can't control things that are outside of what we do here, but we do need to plan for them. So I'm also in agreement that the biggest thing that our board needs to do is set long-range planning goals and adhere to those. And those are all really, in my mind, around curriculum and creating whole learners for our children, and saying, hey, art, music, if I believe that, but if the community believes that those are, sacred cows, then we treat them as such, and we make sure that we set the plans so that we can continue those programs long-term. I think it's also important that we work with the Board of Finance, work with the Board of Selectmen, work with the town, work with everyone, so we're all in agreement as to what we value for our students. We need to set class sizes, so we say we're only willing to have X number of kindergartners in a class and X number of first graders in a class, and those goals are really only achieved through strong long-range planning, being strategic, and deciding what we want our students to have. I think we need to embrace technology, more so even than we have now. We need to look at ways that we can be creative to do that. Years and years ago, Reading worked with Easton to create a district. The problems that Reading are faced with are faced by all the towns, both in our surrounding community and throughout the state. So perhaps we also need, in our long-range plan, to think about ways that we can work with other surrounding towns. I'm glad we're implementing the Singapore math program. I get a little bothered when I hear that a town nearby also had the same consultant come in 2 weeks before or after we had that consultant come in. If we're looking at this long-range planning, maybe we can communicate that with other towns and be able to better allocate our resources so that we're maybe we can get all our teachers in a bigger conference room, whether even if it's in a hotel somewhere, so that we can, better use the dollars, because we're going to be tasked with trying to do doing more with less, perhaps, but certainly using the dollars that we do have very prudently. Same thing in terms of, purchasing supplies and, more importantly, technology. Is there a way that we can combine with other towns to accomplish what we want to? But we really don't know unless we set our goals long term. Getting into finances even further. A couple of years ago, we opted not to bid the bus contract. I don't know if that was our wisest choice, but we're not going to have those options coming up. We're going to need to look at all of our contracts and make sure that we're getting the best value, so that we can put our dollars towards education, and not the peripherals. We can save money on transportation by bidding that out. That puts more money into classroom technology and things that are going to help grow our learners. Another thing that's on my mind anyway is what we are doing with the Easton bus depot, and what we need to do there. I think that's something that we need to be smart about looking at and work with Easton to make sure, again, that we're spending our dollars as best we can. I'm fully in favor of preserving arts, music, and really expanding technology as much as we can. I too am in it for the long haul, with my children being young here in the school, and I want to make sure that our schools stay strong for the long haul, because I'm here for the long haul as well.
Great, thank you. Thank you all for introducing yourselves, etc. I'll open it up to the audience for questions or comments to the candidates.
Having observed carefully the last few years, I would say that one of the biggest sticking points and hardest things for us with our Board of Ed is the relationship with the Board of Finance. And right or wrong, I'm not opining on whether it's right or wrong, but there seems to be a huge lack of credibility and not a good working relationship, which is a constant concern to me and the rest of the community when you see what goes on. So clearly it's a relationship that I think needs to be rebuilt. And again, why it fell apart, it doesn't matter. It needs to be rebuilt. So I wondered if each of the candidates could just take a couple of sentences to say how they think they can help make that happen.
I would say communication. That's how I rebuild any relationship. Open communication. I think something that's perhaps missing in the Board of Ed meetings that I attend is scenario building. It's presented as this is our only option, or I can think of an instance. I don't know if I should bring it up. I'll bring it up. So last year there was a question of whether or not we have a fifth section of kindergarten or gifted and talented. That was the situation presented as the only scenario. And I think that there's an opportunity being missed there by not running other scenarios. And I think by running other scenarios, perhaps not only do you end up with a better scenario, maybe not the best, but something that's more workable. I think it would also show to the Board of Finance that we are considering, that the Board of Education, the Board of Education is considering other options. And I think that comes through open communication.
I agree with everything that she just said. I also think there's a kind of a combative, like it's not just animosity, it's like combative that I've seen. And I think that there's been from the Board of Education a kind of digging in at the heels to say, like, we will not cut this, we will not cut that, and which is true. I think one thing that would help the community is if everybody just agreed we're never going to cut Project Adventure. That's always brought up, and my kids write letters, and I just can't imagine a situation in which that would happen, and it's just done to scare people into action, I guess. I don't think that the Board of Finance would want something like that to happen. So I think that there needs to be some trust from the community and from both boards that, like, we have certain standards that we're not going to let go of. But like I said also, we've underspent our budget. So when the Board of Finance says arbitrarily, well, we could cut this much money, and then the Board of Education says, how dare you cut this much money, and then we have that much money left at the end of the year, there's a lack of trust there. And I think that communication goes a long way to that, and also for the Board of Education to responsibly spend the money that we are entrusted with by the town.
I think there's a credibility gap, and I think there's a planning gap. And I think those are the two things that are driving the current tension. The credibility gap comes when the Board of Finance sits at a meeting and asks for a very simple question, such as, how much money is in your health insurance reserve? And nobody can answer it. I think that just feeds the fire of Board of Education asleep at the switch, which I think is an unjustified accusation, but I think the evidence points in that direction when that's what happens in a meeting. I think that credibility gap needs to be closed with a better understanding of the information that needs to be delivered, the accuracy of the information, and the clarity with which it's communicated to both the Board of Finance and the community at large. The planning gap gets in where we don't know what we want to be 5 years from now. So as a result, when we do present a budget that says we want 1,000 paper clips, the Board of Finance says, I think you can do with 700. And the Board of Education says, no, 1,000. The Board of Finance says, why? And the Board of Education says, because. Instead, if you say, we need 1,000 paper clips because our STEM curriculum requires that every kid gets 10 paper clips, we have 100 kids, and this is what we all agreed with in a long-range plan about how to get there, then the Board of Finance can't say 700 is just as good. Because as a community, we've all come together and we've said, we need 1,000 paper clips to move this education forward and these schools forward. And when you have a long-range plan upon which you can build a goal-oriented budget and then judge the return on those investments against your budget year over year, you improve the credibility with which the communication goes forward, and you establish a cohesive plan in which all stakeholders are working together, and you don't have conversations about arbitrary numbers. You have conversations about common goals and how to achieve them within the well-meaning, within the means of our town.
I think it would be simplistic to say, hey, we have a greater than 50% new board, and all of a sudden, hey, we're going to have great communication. That's not necessarily the case, but I think that we have the opportunity to improve upon what's been the relationship that's there. And again, I'll go back to the fact that we have to plan better and say, hey, these are the things that we absolutely need and absolutely can't live without, and be able to work with not only the Board of Finance, but also other people in the community who have an interest in this and are dedicated to both our town and our schools being stronger. And really, it's going to take a lot of work. That's what we're all agreeing to do here, is to really figure out what we need to move our schools forward and be able to communicate that to the Board of Finance, and more importantly, have the Board of Finance giving us input so that we're all really working together for the long haul and not coming into, hey, let's spend 11 months figuring out how we're going to throw this budget past. Everyone is involved in it, then it's going to be, we can spend more time on figuring out how to improve schools, how to improve curriculum, and spend more time at our meetings doing that rather than spending so much time worrying about the budget.
Finally, I would add that I've attended a lot of Board of Finance meetings just to observe and to hear what the board is doing, what their mandate is, what's their responsibility. The Board of Finance oversees more than just the Board of Education budget. And I think sometimes what happens during the Board of Ed budget season is that the focus gets very myopic on that one item. I approach every board member on every board as a community member, as someone who's volunteering their time and therefore deserves my respect. I sat at a Board of Finance meeting where someone that I didn't know very well, but knew a little bit, stood up and was just outright rude to a Board of Finance member, and I was shocked. I just didn't think that went on. And this was firsthand, it was at town hall, and the next morning I picked up the phone and I called that Board of Finance member and I said, I'm really sorry that happened, because I think we're better than that. And I can disagree with what you're saying or with what the choices are, but I think it's out of line to speak to each other like that. And so that's how I will approach the relationship between the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance, because I think we all have to start at that baseline respect, remembering that we're all doing this to contribute whatever talents we can bring to the table. And there is an inherent tension between boards. That's by design. And that tension does not have to turn cantankerous or adversarial. I think it has, and Heather used the word combative. I think that that is the line that gets crossed that we can, as individuals, model and not allow. Does that help? I mean, does that make sense? So that, I just feel like it has bothered me for 4 cycles. That's what I mean by Groundhog Day. Here we go again. No, we are not going to fight this time, guys. We can fight on issues, but it's not, get obnoxious in person or in private. And there's plenty of examples to go around about that, but it doesn't have to be that way. And I will not bring that to the table.
And on Facebook. Anyone else?
Oh, we're a quiet bunch.
We've answered them.
And there's none. And there's none online either.
Well, we have.
Bueller?
I can
Bueller?
make a comment or two. Of course you can. And John is the only one who brought up the busing. So what 4 of you will be dealing with will be how and whether you bid the contract out or where you can park those buses. And I'll just speak to a recent article. I think it was in the Eastern Courier, but the Reading Pilot ran it online. That seemed to put the onus on the town of Reading for the bus depot. And I will say that I'll go out on a limb here and say that the town of Easton seems to be refusing to negotiate with the Reading Board of Education and the Region 9 Board of Education over the bus depot. So it's not at all the case. I think from the town's perspective, we are happy to work with the Board of Ed and the town of Easton to resolve where your bus depot goes. But because the Board of Education negotiates a bus contract, decides who your vendor is, and where the buses ought to be, wouldn't be appropriate for me to be negotiating where your bus depot is built. So I would say the town of Easton, we have a Board of Education who has been doing this since I can remember. I would like to see them work with you, and the town will be ready to stand behind you.
Can I speak to this for a second? So several months ago, at a planning commission meeting, John Hayes, raise your hand if you know who John Hayes is. Okay, John Hayes is just this delightful man. He is our town planner. Who knew that Reading has a town planner? Okay, what are we planning? That's what we were planning. So John Hayes comes to the meeting and brings up this topic. So this happened months ago, guys. So this is what's so cool when you get involved and you realize there's these different boards and groups working together, right, that affect each other. So John Hayes comes and puts this big map on the table and explains, okay, because he's also the planner for Easton, okay? So we've got John Hayes, all of us. So we're together on this. We are going to work together. He shows us that he has researched and ascertained that there is no suitable places in Reading to put the bus depot, okay? So he presents this information to us, and I'm thinking, good. I don't really want those buses, but that's short-sighted, I get it. So when I read the article that Julia's referencing, first of all, I'm saying, I found it a little confusing, frankly. I'm glad you brought it up because I think maybe we need a little further explanation because I don't understand how we got from, well, the planner has advised the town planning commission that we cannot put the bus depot in Reading, hence it must go in Easton. And we will, find a fair market price, one would presume, right? And Reading's Board of Education will advocate for Reading, one would presume, to make sure that we compare what is paid for, a similar housing of buses. I think this is a great example of how communications, right, break down. And when I read your point in the article, Julia, about, or somehow this became about Easton and Reading not, working together, I thought this is like a red herring. Something went awry.
Well, I can tell you that we have this tri-board structure. And I think in the first conversation I had with Adam Dunsby, it was, well, you work as a tri-board to negotiate all your administrative contracts, and you negotiate a central office lease, which I was part of as member of Region 9, and the process works quite well. Well, we don't recognize central office as a legal entity. Okay, so I went and looked at the contracts for the lease, and send me the bus contracts, send me the lease, okay. In the case of the lease, Peggy Sullivan signed the contracts for all of us, but we were all there when we negotiated this. It really wasn't difficult. We had a superintendent who really led the process and the finance was engaged, and members of each board. It was very civilized. But, of course, dealing with the town is much easier than dealing with 3 boards. I think it would set a new precedent, and also it would lock you into where you park your buses. What if you want to go out to bid on your bus contract? Well, we've signed a 10-year lease with Easton. You're stuck. Or we're on the hook for paying for a parking depot that we're not going to use because you can save money. You can save more money in your bus contract than the $150,000 we're paying to Easton. So, again, back to you, but there's this, that's just part of it. And as far as why we can't have it in Reading, that's kind of it would have to be centrally located to make sense for where the buses go. Georgetown was deemed to be too far by the central office administrators. So,
And here at JRMS, there's a lot of
happy to have
wetlands.
that conversation with Board of Ed and collaborate, but in no way, it seems to me we're willing to work with Easton, and the town will back you and work with you. I would say Easton is refusing to negotiate in good faith with the
One of
boards
my
of
great
ed.
observations preventing the board of the past 2.5 years has been on transportation. And it goes back to the 2015 decision to renew the DATCO contract without bids. And it was driven, in my view, a large part by the Eastern Board of Education, because the Eastern Board of Education at the time had it in mind that we were going to convert our fleet to natural gas. The advantage of natural gas is there's a natural gas pipeline in Easton, which means that they could put in a bus depot in Easton to fuel the buses, and we'd be locked in with a natural gas fleet in Easton for years to come, and they recognized that we'd have no choice but to pay rent to their depot, and they'd see it as a revenue source. And over the past 2.5 years, it's been Jeff Parker and the Easton Board driving the bus on the bus depot conversation, right through a June meeting in this room where he basically declared, well, we've decided this is what we're going to do. It's with the Planning Commission in Easton. We're going to be behind the school, and it's going to be great. And I stood up and I said, whoa. When did this happen? Because the words bus depot haven't come out of any member of the Board of Education in a year. And so before you tell me what we've all agreed to, let's actually have the conversation about what it is we're doing. Because we shouldn't be in a situation where DATCO is demanding what it is the bus depot looks like. Because right now, we're looking at a $500,000 construction project in Easton where there's this particular kind of garage that DATCO wants, and it's not going to be enough, and they're still going to have to send their buses to Bridgeport to be maintained and repaired. And it's lunacy to me to let DATCO be dictating what it is this bus depot is going to look like. We now have 1.5 years to figure out where the buses are going to go. They don't necessarily need to be in Easton or in Reading. They're in Bethel right now, and both towns are paying rents to have them in Bethel. Also, I was at the planning meeting that John Hayes presented with respect to the possible sites in both towns. What's notable is that he presented with respect to currently publicly owned and suitable lands, which I think is also a little bit myopic and short-sighted in the sense that we have an enormous town with an enormous amount of land, and the opportunity of a public-private partnership has not been considered, bid out, discussed at all. And so before we foreclose the opportunity of saying, let's have them in Reading and charge rent to Easton, let's actually look at whether there are suitable facilities that might be privately owned right now that would provide a benefit for everybody. And Julia's going to contradict me.
No. I provide an location centrally located near John Reed. The problem, it would be a zoning issue, there would be a massive town fight, there would be legal issues, and the property itself was purchased, we talked about $1 million when it was marketed. So there was a centrally located, and I said to the administration, here we go, centrally located, so now you'd have to buy it, and we'd be building a bus depot. Right. It would be the same thing.
But the point is not to sort of gloss over that John Hayes' decree there is nowhere in Reading for buses, because I think that's an overly simplistic view of the ultimate reality. There's going to be an expense one way or the other, and if it's the town purchasing and having ownership over it in perpetuity, perhaps with a long-range view, that's better than locking ourselves into paying whatever Adam Dunsby and successor want to squeeze us for rent every year.
I think it's a regional approach. we have a regional high school, why do I we go together, and rather than paying each other rent, we share the cost of all of that over
And the liability.
liability. So,
There isn't also what is a fair market value for something that we're the only ones that want.
right, but again, Board of Ed needs to have this
Yeah.
discussion.
Yeah.
So, and Melinda Irwin, I've been in touch with her, she's on it, and Paul Coppinger, who is chair of the transportation committee, and member of Region 9, so I look forward to people taking up that discussion, and the town will be there, I think, so.
Yeah, I would just, if I could just add to it, online, that it just doesn't make any sense for us to pay Easton for this and then get a discount going forward on their share of it. So we're paying our share and then also paying their share. We need to be working together, as I mentioned earlier, with different, whether it's Easton or other towns, and figuring out ways that we can be strategic about these things. And I think it's really foolish to lock ourselves into anything before we negotiate the bus contract, because who knows, perhaps a provider has been centrally located or has figured this out better than we have, and that's something that they would bring to the table as a vendor.
And one last comment on the overly simplistic view is to say that Mr. Hayes said there isn't. No, I'm saying that when Mr. Hayes presented that information at the meeting at which you attended, the charge of the planning commission is to say, or to speak to, or advise the Board of Selectmen, is this or is this not in line with the town plan? We have actually a town plan. You didn't know we had a town planner. I didn't know this either. We've got a thick town plan. And what his point was, again, not to get in the weeds, which is why it may sound overly simplistic, is that there is not a spot currently. Could we purchase? Yeah, that wasn't what the discussion was. There is not a place right now to add to the discussion going forward for boards of ed and boards of selectmen to discuss for the bus depot. So that, I just wanted to clarify that, because it wasn't to be simplistic, it was to be headlined.
Time for more questions?
Sure.
First of all, just Julie as well, so I really appreciate all you stepping up and volunteering to serve the Board of Education. It's been a very, very informative session this morning. I appreciate your value to the community. You provide lots of time. I think you take this so seriously. A couple of things. One, well, I just asked the question. Long-range planning, I think that's very, very important. I've been to a number of Board of Finance meetings over the years too. And speaking with Board of Finance members, I hear, I think some of the comments, or at least the impression is made sometimes, that the school administration will take the budget from last year, pick it off the shelf, blow some dust off, and say 2% more. And the Board of Finance is saying, at some of the points where you've asked them to spend a little bit less, there's money coming back at the end of the day, so maybe there's a different way we can go about this, because right now there seems to be a lack of communication with what's best. So I guess my question is, I know there's been a long-range planning committee that set up a while ago, and there's been very few meetings as I've followed over the years. Practically speaking, how do you get a long-range planning to the table?
Honestly, I think, I don't even know if I want to say this. It has come up several times in Board of Ed meetings that when we're thinking really long-term, where things seem to be heading is a more unified school district and unifying Easton and Reading. And that's something that people don't really want to talk about. It's a huge change. People don't like that. I don't think that we should have, Easton and Reading elementary school kids shouldn't spend 45 minutes on the bus in the morning. But if we're talking real long term and making an investment to make things an improvement in the future, having a centrally located middle school that serves both Easton and Reading would be a huge investment. It would be an investment for the town. We could have a beautiful state-of-the-art middle school somewhere near the Barlow campus. Yeah, but that's like a huge, I've only been on the Board of Ed since February. This has come up at nearly every meeting. Someone mentions, usually Jess, this is what we need to be thinking about. And I know from the Tri-Board meeting, Easton is very reluctant to even go there because they've made investments in their infrastructure that we have not. So they're not willing to just sort of discard those investments. But I think that that's something that would be a really brave and courageous thing for us all to face.
Michael, I think I certainly share your concerns. I think, as you know, I've spent the past couple of years wringing my hands with the Board of Education about this issue, because I've seen the Board of Finance say, there's no plan, why should we trust your budget? And so there needs to be a plan to create that level of trust. And I think the annual Board of Education meeting cycle goes something like this. September, welcome back, everything's great, let's hear from the administrators. October, let's talk about some kind of policy issues. November, it's almost budget season. December, January, February, March, April, oh my God, budget. And whenever anything comes up in a policy sense, in that sense, it's, all right, after the budget season, we'll talk about it. We can't talk about it now. And then in May, it's, whew, the referendum passed. All right, let's have a nice summer, everybody, and come back next year. And so there's never actually that work that gets done. And I think that it takes work outside the conventional monthly Board of Education meeting to do it. It takes shared work with stakeholders in the community beyond board members. You have a Board of Finance member, a Board of Select member, members of the community who really pull in the right direction. And if you look at, there was a long-range planning steering committee, which was set up with members of the Easton Long-Range Planning Committee, the Region 9 Long-Range Planning Committee, and the Reading Long-Range Planning Committee. And they met, I think, once. And the result of that steering committee was, in Easton, we've already done long-range planning. We're into phase 2. Whenever Reading gets off its stuff and does it, we're happy to have a conversation. But in the meantime, we're not going to get dragged back into the morass of first stage long-range planning. We're already beyond that. They have a long-range planning committee. They know what they're doing. As Laura alluded to, the town is required to have a plan of conservation and development every 10 years. The state requires it. It covers schools in part, but it covers the town generally. I think it's incumbent upon the community to have a plan of development for our school district as a governing document that we can look at and we can say, here's Reading 2018, here's Reading 2028, how are we going to get there? And that provides the framework for communications with the finance side, communications with the community, and goals to shoot for, which then allow, instead of dusting off the budget every year, we say, well, we agreed that year 3 is the year we really dig in on STEM. So we need to invest now in 100 more Chromebooks. So that's why there's $200,000 in this line. It's not because last year we put $200,000 in technology, and we do every year. It's because this is the point in time in our plan where we do this. And that's how you build credibility with the community. That's also how you send signals to the broader community that says, we're a town that takes the future of education damn seriously. And if you want to come to this town, in 5 years, this is what we plan to have. Not in 5 years, we're going to still be arguing about whether a 0.5% reduction or a 0.3% reduction is best to maintain the quality of our education. Because that's not a conversation that sells houses, and it's not a conversation that sells credibility or excitement in our community.
So how do you change going from a year-to-year incremental perspective to a longer-range strategic perspective? What will each of you do to make that happen?
To start, I would be more than willing to be heavily involved, chair, whatever, a long-range planning committee that exists on the outside of day-to-day Board of Education work. I think it's short-sighted to think that it'll happen overnight. I think you need to develop a plan. I think it's probably a 12 or 18-month process to get to a plan that you can then buy into. And so 2 or 3 budget cycles from now, you're building a budget off of that plan as opposed to building a budget off of the previous years. And you also have to understand that with a new director of finance and operations at Region 9 and Reading and Easton, the way we're doing budgeting is also slightly in flux, which I think is part of why we had a giant surplus last year, because there's a change in accounting, a change in how we're kind of managing funds. And so as Scott Rice comes on board, as these plans get developed, the way that budgets happen will morph over time to eventually be aligned with a long-range plan to the extent that we're successful in bringing the community together to do that.
He's absolutely right. I mean, that's not happened at all. I mean, since I've been on the Board of Ed, I have not seen any real discussion of where do we want to be in 3 years, nor have I seen any sort of line by line going through the budget, suggestions coming from Board of Ed members saying, my first meeting, I was looking through the budget and I noticed there was $2,000 for a fish pond at Reading Elementary School, and I was brand new, and I was fish pond, and you know, it's $2,000, but there's like that's what needs to happen. You have to go through everything and say, do we really need this? Is this taking us to where we want to be? And that hasn't happened. And Chris is right that it needs to be something like an investment that we make in time and research.
It's really up to we had billed you all until 10:15, so it's, you know, this is.
One last thing.
I want to make sure everybody had a chance to address the last question. I don't know if you guys wanted to the previous one.
The only thing I was going to add is that I think part of it, again, the issue, and it's been brought up previously, is that I feel like, and weigh in or correct me, but I feel like we're in a bit of a reactionary state a lot of the time, and both in town and then with the state issues, it's like we're trying to respond and put out these fires. And so I very much agree with sort of the framework that Chris just laid out, you know, in answer to your question, how do we do this? What's a concrete plan? I feel like, and I sit at a lot of the meetings, as all of us do, and it's exhausting, you know, everything that you guys have to do behind the scenes before we're sitting in a meeting, and it begs the question, why do I want to do this? But you know, I think that until we can get our footing, both financially, I mean, thankfully we're in pretty good shape here in Reading. We're not in good shape overall. So I think that sort of part of the answer to your question is that there hasn't been much breath and air to take in order to really take this head on, and also people who can step up and take the leadership role on it. And I think the Board of Ed members, right, are just trying to tread water at certain
That's what it
points,
feels like
right?
to me, yeah.
Yeah. So I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, I have a plan.
And also, as soon as the budget comes out, the very first thing is, what are we cutting? What are we cutting? And not where are we going, which is what the question should be.
It is scary to tear up last year's budget and say, hey, we're going to start from scratch, but we're going to have, you know, several new members of the board here. So maybe this is a time to be scared and to, you know, take on more work, which is what we're engaging in here. There are obviously items on the budget that jump from year to year to year that are the same, but there probably are a lot of ways that we can look at more or less starting over. But again, it's all going to spin back to what our long-term plans are and what do we want to accomplish for our schools and for our children.
I had one thing I wanted to throw out there for your consideration that I would love to see the Board of Ed have a robust discussion on at some point when they're not so overly concerned with the budget and other things, which is, how do we feel about being the same or different from Easton? And this feeds into everything you're talking about, long-range planning, everything else. Certainly, the board should be considering a unified school district. I'm not saying whether they should decide yes or no. I'm just saying that it is a natural thing to discuss. People are worried. People have a lot of myths about what is the difference between Reading and Easton. Since I got here, the community has shifted a bit. First, people were fiercely in favor of saying, you know, Reading is different than Easton, and we're proud to be different, and people would have different ideas of what was different about it. What I would like to see the Board of Ed do is have a philosophical discussion on the differences between Reading and Easton, and maybe how we start to feel about it. But you don't have to come to a conclusion. But it would be great if you could ask Tom, who covers both, to say, tell us what the differences are. There are differences in staffing. There are differences in curriculum. I think it would be very healthy for the whole community to have that conversation with the superintendent, with your knowledge. Maybe ask your constituents, ask the community to send us your thoughts on how you feel about Reading and Easton, and just sort of start that conversation. Like I said, you don't have to come to a conclusion, but people don't really know what the differences are between Reading and Easton, and every budget season they go, well, they spend this amount per pupil at Easton. Well, is that what we want or not want? And just because that's a fact doesn't mean that's where we want our kids to go, but it may be. I think that conversation needs to be out in the open with facts about the actual differences and something that we start to discuss. So as part of long-range planning and everything else, people can sort of come to a very informed view of how they would feel about being more similar or choosing to stay less similar than Easton.
And what does it mean? Like what is the identity of Reading and what is the identity of Easton?
And I'd be afraid to pit Reading and Easton against each other necessarily. And I get that you're not saying that, but I think the natural inclination is to say we're better at this, they're better at that, and it creates a little bit of a tension there. I would think more broadly, and I would say, what are our neighboring towns doing? What's everybody doing well, and how can we model that? And I'd also look beyond the state of Connecticut, because I think we have this sense that Connecticut is all that really matters. But if you look across the border in Westchester, you're gonna see a lot more districts that are similarly sized. And that's what that's where we should be looking, is how do these small villages of 9,000 or 10,000 people with 1,000 kids in their district handle things? They do it with cooperative arrangements with other districts. Why aren't we looking at cooperative arrangements with other districts? Not just Reading Easton, Reading, Wilton, New Fairfield, Brookfield, whoever it is. We can share technology consultants, we can share lots of different resources to save money for everybody, advance the system without raising taxes.
Excellent point. I think looking at a similar size district.
Katona,
I just throw that out there.
Katona, Lewisboro, where I went to school, it was very similar, that there's a lot of small towns that all feed into one junior high and one high school. One difference is, that I've seen in virtually every other town, is a robust, well-funded boosters club. And that's something that, just as a parent, I wish that we had here in Reading. At the big town meeting where we presented the budget, how many people stood up and said, I don't mind paying $500 more in taxes. I would pay $1,000 more in taxes. Well, those people, rather than paying $1,000 more in taxes, could be putting the money into a boosters club. People are saying they want to do that. They want to they want to put more money into the schools, and we should have to wait for them to do that.
Well, there has been in the past,
In the past.
right, in Reading Education Foundation, which is defunct, but I agree with you that I think then it's the stakeholders like us who might have the kids at the moment and can justify or feel good about putting that money in, whereas to older folks who are on a more limited income and just can't keep or are going to choose not to stay in town if they have to keep paying more. I think options like that need to be looked at, and I think people who are using a lot of their time complaining on Facebook should start that.
I agree.
And so, but that's all
If I can just add something, we're compared towns, whether it's our test scores, our real estate values, what our per pupils is, or our football teams. We're compared to the other towns all the time, and when people are making decisions on where to buy, that's something that I know I did this a few years ago, and I know people are doing today. Maybe one of the ways that we can really put ourselves above is by working with those other towns and being a leader in borrowing, stealing ideas, but with the idea of and sharing our own, so that we can work together and make our town, one that stands out and continues to stand out.
Very informative, thank you.
Thank you guys very much. I think for all of your benefit, we did go well over, but really super grateful for all of you for coming. We do have 10 minutes or so of actual PTA resolutions to make, so if I could encourage anyone to stay so we could have a small forum for a vote, that would be great. But again, very grateful for your participation.